Hello everybody, welcome to today's video. Today I am going to be explaining how I got my tones for my Loathe covers. Now this video was requested by Pizzazz8352 or Pizzazz Multicams several months ago, and I feel really bad because he was like, hey, could you make a video on this, like how you got your tones? And I was like, yeah, sure, I can do that. And then I just never did. And I decided to, send a comment his way and ask if he wanted the video still, and he said yes, so here we are making it. Now, unfortunately, I do not have the original project files because I've been pretty low on space on my computer. But I did find a backup which does have the instances of the archetype Nolly and various other plugins I was using for the different sounds. Now, the main tone for this cover is actually a stereo preset, but I turned the stereo off, called Beefy Rhythm. I dialed this in myself. So pretty much we got the compressor pedal in the archetype Nolly. The comp and level are both at noon, and it's on snappy for the attack. The overdrive, the levels just past 12 o'clock, and same with the tone. And the drive is at 0. The other two pedals are not on. And then for the amp, we're using the sort of high gain rhythm head with the Marshall style cab. And, here are all the settings, so if any of you guys want to copy this. And then for the cab, I don't personally use third-party impulse responses. I find it a little unnecessary. Generally, if I want to tweak the sound of the guitar to sound a certain way, I'm just going to use the stock EQ on Reaper or some form of compression. So I'm using the stock IR, which is, the Marshall style cab with a 57. This is sort of the position. The distance is right up next to the speaker. And then I am not using a second microphone. And then for EQ, it's pretty standard. I've barely done anything. The tiniest mid scoop, a slight bit of 250 hertz boost, a slight bit of 75 hertz boost, but a high pass filter cutting everything below 50 hertz, I believe. Then I've got a slight 1.5K boost, a slight 4.5K boost, a slight 8K boost, and no delay or reverb. So that's for the guitar left. And then guitar right is quite similar, but I'm using a different preset, my baritone rhythm preset, which is stereo, but of course, since I'm stereo tracking, I'm not using the stereo, so I'm turning it off. So, same settings on the pedals, same amp, but we got some different settings, a bit lower gain, a sort of, boosted bass and treble, slight mid scoop, resonance is at noon, presence is really high, masters pretty low, output is really high. Then the main difference is I am using the sort of high gain cab, if you will, also with a 57. There's not much difference. I probably should have specified what speaker I'm using because the Nolly does have multiple different speakers, but it's the V30 and G with a 57 on it. And then for EQ, the EQ is also very, very similar, pretty much the exact same, except I think there is an extra bit of an 8K boost and then no delay or reverb. Now, the way I shot this video is kind of interesting. Essentially, there are two stereo guitar tracks, and both tracks have their own take. I don't remember which one goes to which one, but I have two different camera angles, and one of those camera angles represents one of the takes, one of the guitar takes, either left or right, and I cut between the two camera angles in the video, but both takes are going on throughout the whole thing. And these takes were both done in one take, so there are a few mistakes here and there, but I was pretty happy with the results. Now we also have this track for right around here in the song where, you know, the instruments kind of cut down a bit, or at least the guitars do. And you have that sort of chorusy guitar in the left ear. Now for that, I use the Archetype Pliny. Let's see. I don't have any of the pre-effects on. The amp is the sort of mid-gain Marshall-y amp with a mid and treble boost. And then the cab, I'm using the SM57 and a ribbon mic. And for EQ, all the bass is cut. There's a massive 8K boost, a decent sized 4K boost, and then everything else is kind of left alone. And then, of course, I'm using a chorus and reverb. Now, I wish I could actually show you how all these tones sound on their own without the original song. But since I do not have the original project file or the original guitar take audio files, I cannot do that. But I did just want to show how I got these tones just on their own. And I will also show you guys the sounds from my full band instrumental cover of Gourd. Alright, so here is my full band instrumental cover of Gourd. Now, this cover was done completely from scratch. I programmed the drums, I recorded all the guitars and bass, and I was really happy with how this cover turned out. But I did have some issues with the mix. Ever since then, I've kind of thought about remixing the cover, and that's why the drums are routed. But originally, I did not route the drums, and I just threw a bunch of plugins on the full drum kind of sound. But when it comes to like actually mixing and mastering, you do want to separate all the different things and use different compression and EQ for each part of the kit. But that's kind of off topic. Let's talk about guitars. Now, for the guitar left, I am using, let's see, the Fortin Nameless, but I'm using the noise gate and the grind pedal, and I'm running that into the Archetype Gojira. I'm using a Rhythm 2 stereo. Let's see. This is, but I don't have the stereo on, of course. That is for the left guitar. Now, specifically for this song, since Loathe loves to use octave effects, you'll see I have an automation envelope, and this envelope is telling the Archetype Gojira to turn on this sort of wow pedal, which is, you know, like a Digitech whammy pedal. I have it on the Fatso setting with the mix slightly lower, and that is bringing in a high octave on top of the original tone. Now, that is only being used for this intro part. So if we turn this off, you're not getting that high octave in there. But yeah. Anyways, so I'm using the wow pedal only for that intro part, then it is turned off for the rest of the song. Pre-effects, I'm actually not using any pre-effects. For the amp, the settings are very simple. Pretty much everything is in and around noon. For the cab, I'm using I think this is a Marshall cab, or the Marshall style cab. I generally prefer how Marshall cabs sound over more traditional high gain amp head and cab like pairings. That's just my kind of, that's my opinion. That's my sort of ear for tone. That's what I like. I'm using a SM57 model for the speaker, or microphone for the speaker, and a condenser 414 for the other one. These are all stock IRs, no third-party IRs. For EQ, we got, of course, a sub-bass cut. Everything is more or less kind of normal, and then we have a slight 8K and 4K boost, and then a 16K cut. It's honestly kind of hard to hear any like high-end frequencies in this range on a guitar, so there's not really much of a point to mess with them. And then, of course, no delay or reverb. And then I'm using this EQ in post to cut out around 1K, a little bit of upper mid-range around 5.3K, and then a boost around 12 to get that super grindy sort of sound. And, you know, that's sort of how it sounds. Let's get to the heavy rhythm part. Pretty nasty sounding. And then also with takes, I, pretty much recorded every section in and around one take. There are some parts, like when it goes into a new section where I started a new take because, this is a full song. I'm not going to go through the entire thing in one take when I'm trying to make a professional sounding instrumental cover of it. That's just how it is. But yeah, the second guitar is pretty similar. Alright, so on this, I'm using the archetype Gojira, but I'm bypassing everything except the wow pedal, which is for that grindy sort of octave tone on the intro. And then I'm using the Fortin Nameless, using the noise gate and the grind pedal, no overdrive. I'm actually not using the built-in gate, I'm just using the noise gate pedal. That's interesting. And then this one's a bit more mid-focused, it seems. Bass is boosted, treble is cut, and mids are left alone. Presence is a little below noon, and then, gain's super high. The stock IR's 57. Condenser 184. EQ. Okay. Subcut. High frequency cut. Everything's left normal. No delay or reverb. And then for EQ, it is a very similar EQ, sort of upper mid 4K cut with a 10K boost, and it sounds like this. Definitely not as bright and grindy as the right rhythm tone. A little bit more pleasant to the ears, I guess. And let's get to the heavy part. So that's about it. And then I have a rhythm guitar bus, which I'm using a supercharger compressor on. I don't use this plugin anymore. This is before I got the GGD smash and grab compressor, and I use that for like any compression because it is just simply better than this, single knob kind of thing. And then this Ozone 11 EQ, as you can tell just from looking at it, this plugin does not fit with my computer's screen size, so I have to oftentimes go into my computer settings and change the resolution scale of my entire display just to get this plugin to work. So needless to say, I don't use it anymore. I just use the stock Reaper EQ, and this is how the guitars sound together. See the heavy rhythm. And then I have some overdubs. I don't exactly know why, but I was kind of experimenting around and I decided to record a center rhythm, which you don't really have that when it comes to, guitars normally. But it kind of added some extra bass to the mix, and that's why I ended up doing it. Now, this center rhythm is the archetype Pliny with compressor and drive. And then it's the super high gain amp. All the mids are kind of cut, a little bit of a bass boost. The bright switch is on, and then, SM57 with a ribbon mic. The EQ is kind of just more of like a high shelf, high cut. And then no delay or reverb. And it sounds like this. So it really just kind of adds some like some bass into the overall signal. And then we have this overdub, which is for one of the first kind of heavy breakdown parts in the song. Now, this one I used quite a fair amount of stuff on. I stacked the Archetype Gojira and Pliny together. I'm using the Archetype Gojira for the wow pedal and this octave pedal, and then the Pliny for the main meat of the tone. So I've got an octaver and a drive. I've got 3 octave pedals running on this thing at once. And then here are the amp settings, nothing too crazy. Stock IR, same mics as the last one. Then a bunch of super high, like 16K, 8K, 4K, 2K boost. And then a bunch of reverb. And then I've got the Reaper EQ running, cutting all the bass, all the super high frequencies, and just boosting mids. And, you know, this is how it sounds. And we can hear how it sounds in the context of the full mix. And then, while we're here, we might as well talk about bass. Now, I'm not the greatest at dialing in bass tones. It's definitely my weakness as a producer. So, yeah. For this, I used, actually, Faisal from Loathe. He has a couple of pretty nice presets on the Parallax. I used his Precision Crunch preset. I don't know what I changed on it necessarily, but with this little asterisk here means I changed something. And then I used the Reaper EQ to boost 1K and 3.5. Now, yeah, I don't know necessarily what I was doing. This was one of my first, like, full mixes I ever did. So, yeah, needless to say, I've learned a lot since then. And then on the bass bus, we're running the supercharger compressor, which, like I said, I do not use that plugin anymore because it's kind of cheeks. And then the Reaper EQ for a sub bass boost, slight around 2K scoop, and then a complete cut at around 7.5. And this is how the bass sounds. Now, I'd probably redo the bass, honestly. I was recording with my Yamaha TRB-X bass, and that thing, it's a great bass, but the neck was kind of a little warped on it, and the EQ, the intonation was really bad. So, honestly, not great. But, yeah, so it definitely caused some issues with the sort of how in tune it was with the rest of the instruments, but yeah, that is pretty much how I've got my Loathe kind of guitar tones. Now, I could bring up the Broken Vision rhythm cover, but honestly, I think this more or less covers it all, because I'm pretty sure with the Broken Vision rhythm cover that it was probably the same tones, maybe even simpler. I think I might have just used the Nolly and that was it. But that pretty much should cover everything. Now, thanks to Pizzazz Multicams for waiting several months for this video to come out, and I will be getting back on the grind and uploading more videos soon enough. It's just I've been super busy with work and life stuff, but I am getting back into recording, and I think I will be coming back stronger than ever. But thank you guys for watching this video, and I will talk to you guys later.